This is what we're doing to preborn children every day here in this culture. We're mass murdering them by the thousands. Over 60 million innocent children have been butchered in the past 4.5 decades with the silence of the churches. What does true Christianity look like in a culture that mass murders helpless children? Christians in this nation have tolerated the mass murder of children and accommodated their lives to it. This is not the fruits of a godly nation. What has this nation come to? Look what we're doing to little children. Take a good long look at these images. These images that you see. Think about what you saw on these images tonight as you're laying in bed. Your little neighbors, your littlest neighbors, most needy neighbors who are being massacred on your watch. And you have the freedom to do something about it. The First Amendment. You can speak up for them. You can go out to the abortion mills to help them. And most people refuse to do so. Take a good long look at these pictures, at these images. Take a good long look at these images. This is your neighbor who was murdered in the womb. Every day in our culture, over 3,000 helpless children are murdered in abortion mills in this area and all across America. And this is tolerated by the American church. Most Christians are content going to church on Sunday and letting this happen to their neighbors on Monday. What does true Christianity look like in a culture that murders helpless children day after day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade? We have tolerated this and we have accommodated our lives to it. What are true Christians in this nation doing about mass murder? Most are doing absolutely nothing about it. They have no urgency whatsoever. Most people are doing nothing about the abortion holocaust. Most people are doing absolutely nothing about the abortion holocaust. They are dehumanizing the preborn child. Take a good long look at these images. This is your neighbor who was murdered on your watch. These children are murdered every day while Christians look the other way, while Christians stand silently by while their neighbors are being butchered at Planned Parenthood, at abortion mills. We have not loved the least of these. We allowed them to be murdered. Jesus Christ said the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. But we have failed to love the least of these, to love our littlest neighbors, our most needy neighbors, those in the womb, in the most dangerous place in the world, their mother's womb. You're living in the midst of a holocaust, and most people don't care. Most people don't address this. Most pastors don't address this because they're cowards. You're living in the midst of a holocaust. Check out this website, abolishhumanabortion.com. See what most Christians will not say a word about. You're living in the midst of mass murder. Children are murdered by abortion. They're murdered through hormonal birth control. They're murdered through in vitro fertilization, IVF. And most are silent about it. They look the other way while the murders go on, while the murders continue. Year after year, decade after decade. True Christianity, true Christians do not stand idly by while their neighbors are murdered in cold blood. And they know when and where the murders are taking place. Just search on your smartphone, on the phone you have, search for the local abortion mills. We know when and where these murders are taking place, and we still do nothing about it. Have the same response for preborn children being murdered as you'd have for born people being murdered. Have the same response. Look what's happening to your preborn neighbors. They're being mass murdered, and most people do not care. Look what's happening to your preborn neighbors. If you're a Christian, Jesus Christ said the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And we have failed to do thus. We have failed to love our preborn neighbor as ourselves. We have allowed them to be mass murdered, over 60 million surgically. We have not loved our neighbor as ourselves. We have tolerated their bloodshed. We have tolerated the shedding of innocent blood. What does true Christianity look like in a culture that mass murders innocent, helpless children? What does true Christianity look like in a culture that does this to children every day, by the thousands, by the tens of millions, over 4.5 decades, and they continue to look the other way? You're living in the midst of a holocaust. Over 60 million children, and the number is growing every day, of children who are being mass murdered. What is your response in the midst of a holocaust? The response of most people is to do nothing, is to say nothing, but what is your response? Be one of the few to rise up and abolish abortion. Be one of the few to rise up. If you agree, come and join me. Park your car and come join me. You won't be by yourself out here. What does true Christianity look like in a culture that does this to children? It does not tolerate their bloodshed. If the cold-blooded murder of the preborn is going to be public policy, then their suffering should be publicly displayed. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm publicly displaying the sufferings of preborn children for you to see. Let these images haunt you so that you do something to end their sufferings. Take a good long look at these images. Your preborn neighbors who have been murdered on your watch. Take a good long look at these images. This is your preborn neighbor who's been mass murdered on your watch. tolerated by your silence. This is your preborn neighbor. Take a good long look at this. Don't look away. Look what your nation, what your culture, look what pro-life politicians are doing to the least of these, to the littlest people in your culture, the most needy people. We're ripping little children to pieces, and the church is tolerating it and doing nothing about it. They're looking the other way while the murders continue. How can Christians in this nation be comfortable with mass murder? How can Christianity, true biblical Christianity, tolerate the bloodshed of innocent children? How can you call yourself a Christian and tolerate this evil that dwarfs that of Nazi Germany? This Holocaust dwarfs Nazi Germany. Far more people have been murdered in cold blood, and most people are doing nothing about it. What is your response in the midst of a Holocaust, of massive bloodshed of the innocent? What is your response? The response of most is to do nothing, is to look the other way, because the murders are out of sight, out of mind. Because you're not the one being you're not the one being murdered. Most people do nothing about the abortion Holocaust because they're not the ones having their arms and legs ripped off and their skulls crushed. They're not the ones being thrown out in the dumpster out back, sold for medical research. But the Bible does not command you to be selfish, it commands you to be selfless. What does selflessness look like when this nation is doing this to children every day? It does not tolerate mass murder. Take a good long look at these images. Your neighbor who was murdered on your watch, with your silence, with your tolerance. True Christianity does not tolerate mass murder of helpless people. Rather than getting upset that we're showing you these images, get upset that this is happening to little children every single day in this wicked nation. Get upset enough to do something about it, to end their sufferings, to abolish abortion. Check out abolishhumanabortion.com. abolishhumanabortion.com. Ask the Lord what He'd have you to do to end the murders of your preborn neighbors. And don't make the excuse that's not your calling. That's nonsense. This is not a special calling when people are being mass murdered. Christians have a duty to speak out. The Bible commands us to take action, to love the least of these, to love preborn children who are being mass murdered. And most Christians are content doing absolutely nothing to help their preborn neighbors. Most pro-life politicians do absolutely nothing to abolish abortion. Come out from the crowd. Be one of the few to demand justice for your preborn neighbors, because most will not do that. But you can be one of the few to end the murders of the preborn. You can do something about it. One person can make a difference. Look at history. Jesus Christ selected 12 apostles, 11 of whom turned this world upside down. Just 12 men. One person can make a big difference. You can make a difference in ending this Holocaust and ending the sufferings of your preborn neighbors. Don't go with the flow. Don't go along with the status quo that allows this to happen to children. Most Christians will look the other way. Most Christians will ignore us out here. Most Christians will continue along with their comfortable lifestyles, knowing that this Holocaust is going on and they couldn't care less. Take a good long look at what you're tolerating.